Good morning and welcome to Open Line Online, Sunday, October 20th, 2019. And I want to first introduce myself. I'm Fatim Muhammad, and I want to apologize for the late start. We had a little technical difficulties. We don't have that too much. So once in a blue moon, we have a little technical difficulties. Is that right, Bobby Charles?
Well, I think
Is that really true?
I think our viewers will have a different view of that. So
I just wanted to get this
Yes.
morning rolling first. Let me just say this before I introduce the panel. I just want to say to all of those that are watching, if you have family members or out there that are doing the walk for breast cancer awareness month today, there are numerous walks taking place here in the New York tri-state area. Kudos to you all out there. Also, this month, October, is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we had planned to do a extended segment here today on domestic violence, but after talking with the guests, their schedule was not available, so what we're planning is to do it on the on-air show next Sunday. But you never know. You have to stay tuned for that. But anyway, enough with me rambling. Let's introduce the panel so we can get to talking and debating about the issues that have taken place this week. First, let me introduce right to my right is one half of the Sports Brothers, Bobby Childs. Good morning, Bobby.
good morning, family. Thank you again for spending your Sunday morning with us. We greatly appreciate that.
And returning from the Bahamas is journalist Nitha Khan. Welcome back, Nitha Khan. How are you?
I
Good
wish I
morning.
was at the Bahamas. Unfortunately, I was back and forth covering the trial of that former police chief,
Exactly.
which unfortunately they couldn't come to a unanimous agreement on the two main charges on the hate crime and the violation of civil rights, but the feds did say they're going to retry him, and it ended up being a 9-3 split. And it was really interesting because a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer did a whole interview with two of the black jurors, and it was fascinating to find out what went on during the deliberations, including the fact that about 3 or 4 white men who believed that he was guilty were crying in the deliberation room because they couldn't convince the 3 holdouts. Like, that's how
Yes.
deep it got.
I read that, and we appreciate the updates on that. Never. I know. Matter of fact, I know you was under the weather, and you still got a chance to go out there, and I'm glad that you did. I'm just joking about the Bahamas. You was under the weather last week, and I think that you did. I know that you did the right thing. Take a day off here so you can continue down there. So I'm glad that you're feeling better.
Thank you. And I did watch part of the show, so no man spreading today, Larry.
Oh, there you go.
I caught that. I was like,
there you go. Let me introduce.
No, but she's got suntan too.
Let me introduce former judge and attorney Bob Pickett. Again, good morning, brother. How are you?
Thank you very much for team. I'm doing well, and I'm delighted that we're able to provide our big crowd out there with some good information today.
Sounds good. And I didn't skip over Brother Protest, Brother Larry Ham from the People for Progress. I am coming to Larry today because I'm going to let Larry kick off the first story today. And Larry, you have the floor, my brother.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in and viewing our program this morning. First, let me give a shout out to everybody that marched with us in the March for the Amistad Law and Teaching Black History in all New Jersey public schools. In New Jersey, we have a law called the Amistad Law, which mandates that black history be taught in all social studies classes, and unfortunately only a handful of school districts implement it. And we had a big march, and everybody that was associated with that bill was there, and it turned out great, and so everybody stay tuned. But the main thing, not the main thing, the other main thing we want to talk about now is the tremendous outpouring of New Yorkers yesterday for Bernie Sanders and AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Michael Moore was there, and it was just tremendous there. had to be, the official estimate I saw was 25,800
Wow.
people.
That's a lot.
And that doesn't include the maybe 10,000 or more that were outside because they closed the park. They couldn't let any more people in there. And I'm going to tell you something. It was interesting because there weren't a whole lot of police there. There was a police present, but there weren't legions.
What park? What park was it
This
in?
was Queensbridge Park.
Queensbridge Park.
So
Yeah.
Long
Yes.
Island City? Right?
Yes, and I had to come out from Jersey. This is my first time ever going to Queensbridge Park.
Really?
Yeah, so
2 rivers to cross.
yeah, so even with the GPS, it was like kind of hard to not. But I got there. I had to park 2 miles away because there were just so many people. There was no, parking's hard in New York anyway, but there was nowhere to park.
There's a lot of rap history.
That's right. Nice.
Queensbridge.
That's nice, right?
So I walked up, and if I hadn't been in the VIP section, I wouldn't have gotten in. It was already closed when I got there, but I knew where to go for the entrance, and I was able to get in and get close and take pictures, and it was just great. As you can see from those are pictures that I took actually. And you could just see the sea of humanity that was there, and it was overwhelmingly a youngish crowd, not to the exclusion of middle-aged people and others, but clearly youth was in the majority there, and Michael Moore was one of the guest speakers. I had a picture of him, but I for some reason, my phone wasn't working well, so getting stuff out was difficult. But Michael Moore was there, and he spoke, and of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
What was her message? Since
Her
folks
message-
came out to see her endorse Bernie Sanders
right.
yesterday.
Her message was that she wouldn't have been a congressperson had she not been inspired by Bernie Sanders to run. That in fact you can be an underdog, and even being an underdog, victory is possible. And then Bernie, of course, reciprocated and saying that AOC has had a major impact. In fact, he said she has changed politics as we know it.
At the age of 29.
At the age of the youngest
Mm.
congressperson ever. And it was just wonderful to be there because I think beyond being an underdog, Bernie Sanders being an underdog, there's an overwhelming feeling among Bernie Sanders supporters that the media and the establishment are locking him out. I agree with that sentiment. I think there's clear evidence for it. And sometimes it gives you the feeling of being isolated. But to be there yesterday with the thousands and thousands of people, people were inspired by the speeches and everything else. But I told people, just being there was enough for me. Just being there to know that I was part of a larger whole.
Just want to add one thing, the symbolism of being in Queensbridge. I know I mentioned rap, but it was the reason why the rally was held there is because you go back to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is that she led the way in a sense of protesting Amazon coming into the neighborhood and basically not giving enough givebacks to the people that live in the neighborhood.
That's right.
So that was one of the main reasons, because a lot of people look at AOC like, because she hasn't done anything. This was a big achievement, and I just thought the symbolism of holding the rally down there was huge, and I just wanted to mention that.
Oh, yeah. So you're absolutely right. In fact, that was one of the things on which the rally was built, that this was the area that Amazon wanted to come into. And it wasn't that people didn't want Amazon per se. They don't want Amazon because when Amazon comes in, it ends up gentrifying the community, driving up the rents, driving up mortgages, and the people who lived there originally can't afford to live there anymore.
Right.
That's why people oppose Amazon.
But Amazon also has horrific work policies too.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go that far to say they have horrific. No, I really wouldn't, right?
Oh boy, here we go.
No. But so again, it's easy to jump on certain companies around things, right? So they have a job. So think of it, right? One of the things that people like about Amazon is you can order something and get it right away. That's not the company. That's the demand. So a company will say, what can I do to meet the demand? So if people did not want their goods the very next day or the same day, then they would not have workflows that have people in these big warehouses running back and forth. And then
But
the
they
other
can
thing,
hire more people.
They do hire a lot of people. They hire a lot of people. They are the third biggest employer in the
Okay.
United States right now, if you don't count the U.S. government. So they do hire a lot of people.
But they can hire more, is my point.
They do hire a
As
lot.
huge
All I'm
behemoth
saying is they
that
do
are.
hire a lot of people. The knock that they get are in these warehouses where people say, well, they have me on the clock. Now, listen, they don't deceive people. They say, here's the job. Here's what you're agreeing to get paid $15 to $22 an hour to do. People say, yes, I want to do that.
Because people have no option. I'm not saying they deceive people, but when you're like,
we can
there's
take no talk,
actually,
'cause
you
I'm
know
not
what?
going to win this one.
You should watch. John Oliver did a great little
saw it.
segment on Amazon.
I saw it.
And just the level of like they can't even take bathroom breaks.
That is not true. They do take bathroom breaks.
Okay,
all I'm saying is
level
people have a choice, and they chose to say, "I accept the job as the job was described."
Yeah, but when you
it's
have
not
no
like they
other
deceived
option,
it.
I'm not saying they deceive them. I'm saying they can definitely. They have
in
the
low
means. They have the
unemployment-
means and the resources to provide better working conditions. And when people have no other option, of course they're going to take it. If it's nothing or do this, and you need to put food on the table, that's what they're going to do.
Listen,
Larry,
when
would you
I
like
was
to jump
when
in?
when I was younger, and seasonal jobs with UPS, they would hire you and you were on the clock. You had to load these trucks up for the holiday to make sure that consumers got their goods when they wanted to get their goods. It was back-breaking work. But they didn't deceive anybody. They say it's going to be hard work.
Again,
Are you up
nobody's
to it?
saying they're deceiving. I'm saying that they have the ability.
But if they tell you this is the job, it's like a toll collector. You're going to sit there and take in fumes.
Which, by the way, I did that when I was in college.
Right. But listen, it's not the greatest job ever, but you had choices. You chose to say yes to take that job. And when you
Because
have
there was
record
nothing
low
else available. All
when
right,
you
this
have
is
record
we're
low
getting sidetracked
unemployment,
on
when you
this.
have record low unemployment, you do have choices.
That's correct.
You do have choices.
Okay, wait, say that again. You said there's record low.
Record low unemployment,
no.
which means
No.
that there are more jobs that people are
There
looking
are
for
more
people to do.
jobs that pay lower wages, no benefits, so that you're
They
working
pay-
multiple jobs just to survive.
Well, one way to segue this back to Bernie Sanders is that Bernie Sanders forced Amazon to pay their workers $15 an hour.
Yes, he did.
That before Bernie Sanders introduced his bill, which he called the Amazon, what was it called? Amazon Bezos bill? I mean, it had Bezos' name on it. That they should, and Amazon had, it caused such a stir that Amazon had to relent and had to move and made an announcement saying that from this point on, we're going to pay our workers $15 an hour. That was direct result of the action that Bernie Sanders took.
And I agree with that. And I agree that they can. But my point is, when they pay higher rate wages than they paid before, and people knowingly walk into a job and then complain about what they said yes to, I don't know how you hold that against the company.
The issue
That's
with
all.
the issue with that argument is if we accept that argument, then there would be no need for contract negotiations.
Right, or unions or
Because
anything.
contract negotiations address working conditions. And contract negotiations take place after the original contract. So there's a situation of progressive improvement in job conditions that take place as a result of contract negotiations. If we only say that you agreed to the conditions of this employment and that's it, then there would be no need for a contract.
Right.
Yeah, but
Good
let me
point.
ask Bobby,
Good point,
bring
Larry.
Bobby in on this
Wait,
one.
just on contracts, right?
What I
So,
wanna bring-
just before contracts, right? So there's a story this week that Long Island Railroad officials in a union with contracts were stealing from the company. They were booking overtime and their transportation back and forth. Yeah. And so what's the union is saying, well, they should have did a better job wording the contract. I'm sorry. I hear you on contracts. There is a time and there's a place when employers, employees, individuals working need to be protected. I don't dispute that at all. But I also recognize that people try to game a system. And when they get caught,
Bobby,
they blame the
Bobby,
establishment about stuff.
The employers game the system too. Just this year,
I mean, they both game the system.
the New York City Council had to introduce legislation about wage theft because employers were stealing from their workers. They were not paying them every year. Hundreds of suits come into court because employers do not properly compensate their workers according to the agreement.
Let me bring this
I am
in.
good with
Let me bring
those.
this in
My
about contracts
only
here.
point is both sides. To point it and say it's just one side
No,
over the
I
other.
agree with you.
It
It's
is
both
both
sides.
sides. There
It's
are
both
people who take advantage of medical leave. Medical leave was put in place to actually help people, and then you have people who every year have the same back ailment.
Yeah, but
and
then when they put
disappear.
these,
Okay, you can't- but you can't both
when they put these
sides
checks and balances,
All I'm
in,
saying is you
when
need
they put
checks
these
and balances.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
But when they put these checks and balances, is sometimes these new checks and balances hurt the good people that need it. But the point I was going to make, and this is interesting because I haven't heard this in the come up in the debates, and for the past few years on Reverend Sharpton's show, he's talked to a lot of the top union people. And if you've gone across the country and past elections, one of the conversations are how Republicans are union busting, basically getting rid of unions.
That's what right to work law is.
Exactly. So, there's no conversation about that today at all. And to me, I'm not going to say every union is the best union out there, but when there is nothing in place to protect the workers out there, because as you just said, the unions help negotiate contracts. We as the workers, that there's no unions, we don't negotiate contracts. We have to take what these companies that don't have unions, these private companies,
right.
and we have to take what they give
That's
us.
right.
Unless it's against the law, and if it's against the law, then we have to go and fight it in court.
Right. And those workers that don't have a union have no protection. And the only protection you have is to bring suit against your company. But just trying to bring that back to
the
Bernie
Bernie.
Sanders, one of the things that Sanders talked about yesterday, one of his main platform planks is to make it easier for people to form unions. Because when employees and one term for employees that are not contractual is at-will employees. They call them at-will. Why? Because an employer can fire you at will. So one of the things that Bernie talked about yesterday was that he's going to, as president, he's going to introduce legislation and executive orders that will make it easier for people to form unions, because we know for a fact that the middle class in this country, the contemporary American middle class, the post-World War II middle class, the 20th century middle class, was built by unions. Had it not been for unions, we would not have the size middle class that we have in the United States today. What was also interesting about yesterday's rally is that, the media, and rightly so, if a candidate for president has a heart attack, that's news, period. So it's not wrong for the media to address this question of Bernie's health. He had a heart attack. Yesterday, Bernie was the longest speaker at the rally. He was the longest
Yeah,
speaker.
he did speak for a long time.
He laid out his whole agenda. He must have spoken easily
45 minutes,
45
maybe?
minutes or more. I would dare say maybe even
Maybe an
more
hour.
than 40, maybe an
Well,
hour.
let's talk about
yesterday.
because let's go and talk about this past week's debates. We look at Warren, Senator Warren, in majority of the polls that she has taken the lead, followed by Biden, who is slipping in the polls, and Bernie Sanders did a exceptional job at the debates. Matter of fact, they said he was one of the top winners there. One of the things I have to give Bernie Sanders credit for is this whole thing with Medicare for all. He is being honest about middle class and taxes, and Senator Warren still hasn't really answered this question around that. But I'm gonna start with Nitha. I'll start with you, Nitha. Your assessments of this past week's debates.
Of the debates,
Yes.
which feels like they were ages ago. I'm like, they were this week.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm like, I can't even remember now. It was interesting because I mean, it was still 12 people, right? 12 people on the stage.
Exactly.
So it's a lot to take in, and I know we're all politicos and we're all engaged in this, but I'm kind of ready for it to just narrow down at this point. Like, I really want this process to expedite a little because it's a lot. Like, even for me to sit there and watch 3 hours of this, it was a lot. But I do agree. I thought Bernie did well, Warren did well. There were good points Castro made. So I still enjoyed it. I still, tweeted all of it. And just to bring it full circle with the rally, like, I think, as we've always been saying, it's fascinating that the people who are getting the largest crowds are Warren and Bernie, are the progressives, that is the base of the party. And I know I sound like a broken record because I've been saying this for years, but they are the ones, and it's the young people, it's people of color. They're the ones that are mobilizing and engaging. And I really think that the Democratic Party just has to keep that in mind. And hopefully they will not force a candidate upon us and actually let, the people choose who it's going to be.
Bobby?
Well, actually, before the show, Larry and I were talking about this. And, the point I shared with Larry is, I agree with him. I think Bernie is being forced out of it. Bernie is probably the far more left of the left, the progressive side. And we talked about Elizabeth Warren co-opting a lot of Bernie's agenda.
Well, it was sorry not to cut you off, but it was funny because Nina Turner took a swipe. I thought it was a swipe directly at Warren at the rally yesterday because she said, "What was the line?" She said, "Why would you want to copy when you can have the original?" And I was like, "Oh snap!"
Yeah.
That was like a direct swipe at Warren.
Yeah, like we had joked about it, right? In the record business, it's called a cover. So she's trying to cover Bernie's agenda. But if she's going to win, she's going to have to come back towards a moderate position. And the problem I think she's going to run into is it will make it easy for her opponents to say she's flip-flopping, right? And so you said this, but now you're saying that. And then I look at candidates such as Pete Buttigieg, who has maintained that moderate to a little progressive, but more that safe, moderate. Same with Amy Klobuchar, where Biden is probably that moderate leaning towards the right a bit. And so, it's going to have these degrees of moderation, progressive, conservative that is going to be interesting how it plays out. You have a lot of why AOC is getting so much popularity is because she looks and sounds like the young people, the generation that's coming up. So that's just going to continue. The knock that she's had is she doesn't know what she doesn't know, and so she's going to run into situations where she's going to have to lean on someone who has been there before to help her shape her views around things. So I'm just curious looking at her and Omar around those cases. But, Elizabeth Warren, it's clear that she's in the lead, and that's why she took most of the heat in the debate because pretty much everybody came
Boys
out
going
after
at it,
her.
yeah.
So.
Well, I think AOC and them know a lot more than some people who've been there for a long time.
Well,
Yeah. Larry's laughing.
You just don't know what
Yeah.
you don't know, right? I mean,
Well, yeah, I mean, like,
there's something about
right.
there's something about age, right? When you've actually had the experience to go through things. She's not even 30 years old yet, so there's clearly certain things that she has not experienced in life. I'm not saying she can't learn. I can't say she can't adjust it. I'm sure she's a quick learner and things of that nature. It's just reality, right? She has not been in certain situations that if you go into situations assuming that you know, then you miss the opportunity to learn. And that's my whole question about her.
But you're making that statement like that's what she does.
No, I'm
Yeah.
not saying that.
Okay.
I'm not saying
Okay.
that. I'm just saying, so she has said some things that she's had to back up on just because it's easy for you to get caught up into people are saying I'm right. Let me keep doing this. Let me keep doing it. It's just human nature. You just ride that wave. And all I'm saying, Nancy Pelosi, early on, we talked about how Nancy Pelosi was trying to school them to say there is a different way. And people say, well, that's the old school. It may be, but I'm also saying there's a woman who's actually gone through a lot of these landmines before. And it's just saying, hey, I want you to succeed, but there's a little time to be, we've all gone through this,
Well,
right?
there's a place for both.
Right. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
So it's like you can obviously learn from,
That's all I'm
wisdom
saying.
and experience, but you also need that pressure from the youth and you
agree.
need change.
I agree.
Well,
from
we see
young
in this situation. I mean, if we use Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez as the example of the birth pangs when what is being posed here, how this is being addressed is as a young-old dichotomy. It is that, but that's merely the clothing of the individuals that are in the clothing. The individuals that are in the clothing of young old is really progressive versus establishment. Now, yes, Congresswoman House Speaker Pelosi does bring a certain amount of experience to the job. She's a multi-term Congresswoman. She's the Speaker of the House, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, I would imagine that in her conversation with the squad, so to speak, Cortez, Tlaib, Omar, and Presley, that she's tried to counsel them as an elder statesperson. But sometimes this role as an elder statesperson is not really one of wise counsel. It's one where the establishment is, in fact, trying to repress the new ideas and programs that the
And maintain the
progressive
status
is trying.
quo. Yeah.
You have to be discerning to see it, because sometimes they are really trying to give wise counsel, but other times, it's just like they said to Dr. King. When Dr. King first came on the scene, there was a whole group of preachers that weren't with King. When King called the Montgomery bus boycott, if you read Stride Toward Freedom, the preachers that were in Montgomery, because remember, King wasn't from Montgomery. He was the new kid in town. They wasn't with the Montgomery bus boycott. As a matter of fact, they went off to the side, formed a group, and tried to prematurely shut down the Montgomery bus boycott.
That's why he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail.
That's right. And this is where we say Ocasio-Cortez. What did Bernie Sanders say at the rally yesterday? He said Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has, in fact, put the Green New Deal on the table. And that, before that, Pelosi didn't even want to talk about the Green New Deal. I heard with my own ears on the radio Pelosi saying, the green vision, the green whatever, the green dream, whatever, really trying to disparage the idea of a Green New Deal, when in fact, as Bernie Sanders said yesterday, the Green New Deal can be the impetus for literally tens of thousands of new jobs being created as we build up this part of the economy for alternative energy.
You know, one
So,
of the things.
so Jamie Harris is not
Yeah,
with us today, but he
he's
just
He's
said,
chiming in.
he just said,
What do you-
agree with you, Larry. Some are framing the Democratic divide as a generational chasm when it is fact and ideological difference.
One of the things that is very interesting, and I know Nither, you said that is, you know, it's a little frustrating to see 12 candidates up there, and I came across a stat this past week, and it was interesting, and I believe it was go back to the '08 primary, and at that particular time, Senator Barack Obama, before Iowa, was polling at about 3%. 3%.
Before Iowa.
Before Iowa,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
before Iowa. So, and then when Iowa comes in, he gets the majority of votes. I believe he wins Iowa, and then all of a sudden, he skyrockets. Right now, of course, we're looking at the polling, and you know, polling can be taken with a grain of salt.
Right.
At the end of the day,
The polls all said Hillary was going to win, remember?
exactly. So right now, you know, I don't see, unless they don't have the money to drop out. I just don't know where we're headed with this, in a sense of getting some of these candidates to drop out.
Yeah, well, it won't be until after Iowa and all of that. So I'm just saying I'm ready for it to be 2020. I'm ready to
I know.
move ahead.
Right.
And there's going to be a long, ugly election cycle, too.
Right, but the thing is, you cannot count out anyone. Right.
Now.
Now.
No.
You
That is
can't.
very true.
You can't count out anyone.
I'm glad you raised that, Fatin, about Obama polling at 3%, because that just goes to show you that how unpredictable a situation can be. And it's not just a question of unpredictability, how contradictory a situation can be, because here you have these polls in advance of any primary being held showing some people in the single digits, and how you could end up with a situation where those single digit people, once the primaries are in play, actually jump ahead. So you really can't, you should consider the polls, but you can't put like all of your money, if you're betting, you can't put all your money on the polls.
That's why I mentioned 2 weeks ago here that Reverend Sharpton had did a poll on his show. Now, again, a large portion of his listeners are older, you know, folks over, but say 45 years of age. And when he put out the question, basically, you can change your vote, but right now, if you had to vote for someone, who would you vote for? And the majority of the folks said Joe Biden. So the question is, and I would like to see where a younger audience, the progressives are polled, to see where they're at on this, and which direction we're headed. I think that going back at this past week's debate, I was finally impressed by Bernie Sanders. I really was, because I said last week, you know, some people just say he's out there and he's yelling and he makes the points, but he's made these points in the last election. But this time I saw something a little different, and I felt better about, if Bernie wins the nomination, I can definitely get behind him, and I feel good about him being the electability around Bernie. I don't know when it comes down to Senator Warren. I know what she's polling, but the electability, do you all feel that, you know, that she can beat Trump at this stage? Do you feel that she can?
I think she can. I mean, she took a lot of hits in that debate, and I thought she handled it pretty well. Like, there were a few times where I felt like she could have hit back, you know, a little bit harder. But overall, I think she handled that well. I mean, she was getting it from everybody, pretty much almost everyone on that stage. So I think she absolutely can. And she has a lot of support from a lot of people. That's what I'm saying. Like, her and Bernie are the only ones. So when she was in Washington Square Park, I think it was, I forget, tens of thousands of people that came out or whatever there too. So her and Bernie are the ones that are getting these massive crowds. It's the two of them.
And what I just say, you know, is probably what you have there in the notes that, again, polling, take it for what it's worth, that Elizabeth Warren is up in the polls from black women, educated black women, which could negate the advantage that Joe Biden has with an older demographic of black folks. But while Bernie continues to acquire younger voters of black and brown descent out there. So it's interesting, just polling wise, where individuals are gravitating towards the message there. But I still stand behind. I'm just going to continue to see Elizabeth Warren slowly start to move back towards that moderate position.
That would be a mistake if she did that, honestly. I think so.
It comes down to, and Larry says it better than I do, if you see a path to victory, will you do anything possible to do that? And if it means flipping on your message a little bit.
Yep.
No, but I don't think that would be a path to victory. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
like,
what
for her to
about
do that.
if I posed a question to Mark Morial of the National Urban League today? Can Elizabeth Warren win the nomination without the majority of black support? And his answer was no.
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 I don't think any of them can.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's the answer.
That's, none of
that
them can.
whoever the Democratic Party nominee is, they got to have black support. If they don't have black support, they're not going to win the general election.
But Larry, as you were saying before we went on the air,
Right.
about the superdelegates, right?
Right.
So you just expand on the superdelegates, and this is what I mean around if she sees a path, and that path means you have to have the superdelegates. That's when you start to see a little bit more of a lean towards what the superdelegates are interested in, because they have the power to tilt.
And I think this is one of the main differences between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. That now, if Senator Warren was here, she could speak for herself. I don't pretend to speak for her, but there is a perception that Senator Warren, although she espouses views similar and a platform similar to Bernie Sanders, that she would in fact compromise on those principles, on that platform, if in fact she was told that the path to victory for her was to move, that she has to move to the center. And that's going to be her Waterloo. That is a decision. And we know already what Bernie Sanders would do. We know he's not going to compromise. That's why he has this base of support that's immutable. It's not enough, but it's immutable. Senator Warren, if Biden slips and Warren actually becomes, not as perceived, but becomes the front runner, say by Super Tuesday, then people, her handlers are going to say to her, look, if you want to win, you're going to have to move away from this Medicare for all. You're going to have to step back. You're going to have to step back from some of that stuff. She already said in the debate, she said that she would not sign a Medicare for all bill that resulted in any taxes on the middle class. Now the majority of Medicare for all is not going to be paid for by the middle class. It's going to be paid for by a wealth tax on the wealthiest people in society, but there probably
1%
will.
of the 1%.
That's right. There probably will be some taxes that the rest of us will have to pay.
Basic math says you have to.
Right.
So for her to make that statement is
Yeah.
disingenuous.
Right. Well,
Right, but your overall costs will.
But the point I'm making is that she's not really being disingenuous. She's presaging the future, because she's saying, I won't sign the bill. That's like an escape hatch
Right.
from Medicare for all. Oh, it's going to result in taxes on the middle class. I won't sign a bill.
Yeah.
Which means that she would probably default to the Buttigieg-Klobuchar
Right.
position of a public option.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
Let me just go here, because this is something, and I'm going to read. This is from Anthony Long. And first of all, we thank you for all your comments. When you agree or disagree, as long as you keep it clean and respectful, that's fine. Anthony Long, right? There will be no discussion on reparations for foundational Black Americans. I already have seen that, and I want to bring this up. First of all, let me put my disclaimer out there that I'm for reparations. The issue here, and I see a lot of black folks saying, well, I'm not hearing them talk about reparations. How much do you want them to talk about reparations when this question has been put to them? And majority of the Democratic candidates, when they came to National Action Network, some of the candidates came and they said, when it was posted early in the debates, the candidates that question was posed to said that they would definitely stand by a study to deal with reparations. You cannot just have a candidate and say, oh, yes, we're going to give black folk reparations, and this is how we're going to do that. This is not something that you can do easily. This has to be done in a manner that has to be studied and dealt with the folks that are out there, have been out there leading the charge, because they know more about this. So how much, and I put this out to the team, maybe I'm wrong, but how much do you want to hear about reparations when majority of them say that they support, and if they became president, they will, sign for the study dealing with reparations?
So we talked about this before. Signing for a study is different than executing on providing reparations,
true.
right? So, and it's going to continue to be separated. So I don't think, many of the candidates would oppose signing for a study.
Right.
It comes down to, okay, now here's what the study told us, which, by the way, there's enough evidence out there to show you that the generational divide and the wealth divide goes back to that time period, and all the laws that elected officials put on the books that actually just made it worse, and then redlining, all these other things. So the evidence is there. The question is going to be, what do you do about it? And so that is where you're going to run into all kind of debates around that one, and people are going to be covering their behinds before they decide which side of that fence they run on. But doing the study.
But can a candidate basically go out there, and to me it seems like you putting the cart before the horse if they come out and say, well, I support reparations, but they don't even know what it's going to entail. So that's what I'm saying. Or I'm just.
But most of them
I
did
want us
say
to
they
add
do
this 'cause
support.
a lot of our listeners
Yeah.
put this question out there and
Yes.
say that they don't talk about it. So I want to
Yes.
make sure that we have a conversation about it.
But most of them did say they do support already,
Yes,
right?
the study, yes,
Yeah.
the study, and that, but we don't know what that's going to bring and how that's going to come about.
Right. The viable legislation, the viable bill that's currently in Congress on reparations is H.R. 40.
Correct.
And that is the standard to which the candidates are being measured. Do you support H.R. 40? Because philosophically, anybody can say they support reparations. The
Right.
question is, how do we get there?
Right.
How do we get to a point where the government of the United States says, yes, we're going to repair for the damage that has been done to African Americans and this amount of wealth or whatever? The first step is you got to get a legislation in there that's going to assess the situation. And that's what H.R. 40 does. And I think the majority of the candidates have said they support, including Bernie Sanders. I have seen people say on this program in these messages that Bernie Sanders doesn't
Yeah,
support
you know what? They say
reparations.
that a lot online,
that-
and I'm
that-
like, where's
that-
this
that-
from?
That's,
I don't understand.
That's the talking point of those who oppose Bernie Sanders. If you go, wait. If you go to YouTube and go to Bernie Sanders and Danny Glover, Bernie Sanders and Danny Glover have a YouTube video that was made for this past Juneteenth where they're sitting together and Bernie Sanders says to Danny Glover that I'm going to support H.R. 40. I'm going to support the reparations bill. That was in June of 2019. This is October.
Right.
And people are still saying that Bernie Sanders don't support reparations. And they're just mimicking these talking points that the anti-Sanders people have been putting out there.
Yeah, even at Reverend Sharpton's convention, when is that 15 April? So I remember Reverend Sharpton asked him too on stage at the convention, and he said, "Yes, I support it." That's why I'm like, where do
Right.
people?
And this
get
this
this
is
from?
the anti. When I was down in South Carolina last month, this guy walked into the workshop that we were doing. It just interrupts the work that Bernie Sanders doesn't support reparations, and that is exactly not true. But that's what the anti-Sanders contingent. That's one of their talking points. They're trying to drive a wedge between Bernie Sanders and the black community because they perceive that to be a weakness, that he doesn't have enough black support. And if you, as I said, I'm going to say this clearly to everybody that's watching, go to YouTube, put in Danny Glover, Bernie Sanders, Juneteenth message. This was done purposefully on Juneteenth, the anniversary when black people in Texas found out about the Emancipation Proclamation. And you can watch the video of Bernie Sanders and Danny Glover where Bernie Sanders commits to supporting H.R. 40.
Yeah, where he gets his criticism is he has gone out and, as an example, talked about, I don't believe it's as simple as giving out cash, right?
Right.
And so many folks who talk about reparations is like, just give me the money. So when you think about it, right? So it's the simple way to look at it. But how do you calculate what the dollars are, right?
Who's going to get it?
And how is that sustainable, right? So you're going to have one side that says, yes, we should do something, but it should be done in a sustainable way, which means you're going to put programs in place that have the chance of, going on for centuries, hopefully, versus others that say, no, I don't want any of that. Just write me a check. And so I'll go out there and let everybody criticize me. Most people say, give me a check. They have no idea what they're going to do with that. They go out there and spend on things that once it's gone, it's like people win the lottery. How many people go bankrupt because they get this wealth and they get this thing and they don't know what to do with it, and then they act like a victim. Well, I didn't get enough, or someone should have told me and everything. So so I think there's enough agreement that what has happened in this country was horrific, that something needs to be done. I think there's enough people who believe and support that. The question that is becoming incredibly difficult to answer is, what does the answer look like?
So I take it you don't support the Andrew Yang $1,000 a month to everybody?
No, well, again, other countries have done that.
Money ain't a lot of money.
Right, but other countries,
But it's still $1,000.
But other countries have done that, right? And you have mixed results with it, right? You have mixed results, and this is right.
It's a lot of money to some people.
But again, there's some people, and Fatima and I talk about this, right? There's some people who have enough discipline where that will make a tremendous difference in their lives. And then there's other people, I don't care if you gave them $1 million. They're just irresponsible with some of the decisions that they make. So that's why I'm like, I would need to see
Why
more
you laughing, Bob?
to understand that. But, we all have friends, right, who, who have decent jobs. And then you look at some of their decisions and you're like, really, why? This is, and you've heard me say this before around the recession, right? There were a lot of bad things that hedge funds, banks, and others did. But to me, it was equally irresponsible what a lot of individuals did. For somebody to get into flipping houses when it's like musical chairs, and then you get stuck because the market dries up, and then you're going to claim victim. You are
Wait a minute,
living
but
out.
you're not talking about during the housing crisis, are you?
I am, because here it is. While they made credit
here we go
easy,
again.
here it is. They make credit easy for you. You have to agree to take that.
Yeah, but they were
let me finish. Let me finish. Let me finish.
They
Let
were
me finish. Let me
predatory
finish.
loans.
Let me finish.
You've been filibustering for a long time, though.
I'm done
They
now.
were
I'm
were
done.
predatory loans, and they specifically targeted people who were lower income and went after them. So you can't blame the victims when people are strategically going after them. When these huge,
Some of them
Can I
massive,
finish?
No,
Can I finish?
Exactly.
Can
Most
I
of them
finish?
didn't know.
You went.
Okay, go
You
ahead.
went somewhere I
Okay.
wasn't going.
Yeah, go
right?
ahead. Go ahead,
My
finish.
statement was not every individual. There are responsible individuals. My opening statement was there were some horrific things that these companies did. Predatory is one of them. But there were people who were not victims. They claimed being victims. They were already in the game of, oh, I can flip these properties, I can get low interest rates,
Yes.
and I can flip it. And then all of a sudden, because that was the way they decided to operate out there, right? And then things dried up and they got stuck. And what did they do? They jumped on the victims line. Those are the people I'm talking about.
Yeah, but that's a
I'm not talking
That's
about.
excellent
I'm not
point.
talking
Okay, that's
about.
an excellent
I'm
point.
not talking
I
about
got
the
your
family.
point.
Hold on. I'm
I
not
got
talking
your
about. Let
point.
me
You're
finish.
talking about those
I'm
that
not
pray.
talking about the family who had the American dream
that played
of
the
getting a
games.
property, moving out of certain conditions for their family, and they didn't know enough, and they got taken advantage of. I'm not talking about them.
We got it. We got it. What
you
I'm
didn't get it.
saying,
You jumped on
no,
me
I'm
first.
saying because I do disagree with you because the way that you're saying it, you're making it appear as if those people who may have taken advantage of it are the same as the majority
No, he
who
didn't
were
say
taken
that.
advantage
He
of.
didn't
No,
say
no, no.
that.
I'm no.
He didn't
But
say that.
you are making it seem as if they're on the same level. You
No,
keep
he's not saying
you
that.
keep
He
both sides.
specifically called-
No.
he
But I'm
specifically
saying no.
called
But it's
those
both
out that are
sides.
playing the
You're both
game.
sidesing it, and it's not.
But how is he both
It's
sidesing
because
it
you're
if
making
he's
it.
calling
Okay,
out-
let's
no,
say.
no,
Wait,
he's-
I'll
wait,
tell you.
but-
I'll
but
tell you
he's
how
calling- he's
Fatine. Well,
calling
if you let
out-
me speak,
Yeah,
I'll.
but-
If
well,
you can
because
let
you-
me.
because you keep
If you
saying
can let
both
me. If I
sides.
can get a chance to speak,
But you can't
I
keep
will let
saying
you
both
know. So
sides
if
if he's
out of
calling out-
100 people, 5 of them took advantage, and
Right.
95 were taken advantage of, you can't say that it is the same. That is my point.
But he's not saying that. He's saying
never
those.
said
But
that.
they never said that.
But you're saying
He
you're
never said
saying
that.
but
How
you're
are you saying
saying
something that
but
he didn't
you're
say?
Come on,
but
I have to
you're
leave- I have
making
to
it
leave
seem
at
as if it
10:30.
was the
Let's
He didn't
move
same.
on.
say that.
Let's move
No.
on.
Bobby didn't say that. He talked about
You-
that 5% that took advantage of it.
Okay, and
and
nobody
then
said
and then when it
No, but-
dried up,
okay.
they ran
That's
to the
fine.
victim line. He's talking about the 5%
Okay.
that took advantage. That's all he's talking about.
Okay,
Not the
but
whole
my
95%.
But my point
Next
is that the
topic.
majority are not the 5% that took advantage
you
of. So
never
when you
mentioned that.
talk about only the people who take advantage of something, you're making it seem like that is the storyline when it's not.
it is a
And
storyline.
but
It
it's
is
not
a
the main.
storyline.
The main storyline is the conglomerates and all of these, CEOs and billionaires and millionaires taking advantage of the little guy.
So let-
That
let-
is the main
let- let-
storyline.
You hit the bell, so I'm ready
Yeah.
to move
So
on.
just my last point on this.
Last
right?
point, and we're moving
Last
on
point.
after this.
Companies and governments are made up of people.
Pick up your mic, Bob,
People
pick it.
Oh,
take
corporations are people? Are we
Hold on,
Romney?
hold-
Are
listen.
we Mitt Romneying this now? Corporations are people too?
People take advantage of people. There are
Yes, they
people
do.
who come together
And prey
in
on
government, and they use the backing of that background of government to say, I'm allowed to do this, the same corporations. But let's make no mistake, but there are individuals in those places who make decisions that impact others. It's people on people preying on them. Yes, in a
Nobody
corpor-
said it's not.
But you just said a corporation. You said a conglomerate.
I
I'm
said,
telling you, it's
I
not
said
a conglomerate.
millionaires
It is-
and billionaires.
it is
Those are people.
individuals.
I
It
said
is
CEOs.
Individuals.
I said CEOs.
Individuals.
What is CEOs, millionaires, and billionaires? Those are people.
You said
those are
conglomerates.
people. That's a
We'll
and
roll
who
it back
runs. Yeah,
afterwards.
who exactly?
Conglomerates.
And I'm not denying what I said at all whatsoever. I stand by
Conglomerates.
what I said. Conglomerates, CEOs, millionaires, and
Conglomerates
billionaires.
are not
Those
people.
are people who are taking advantage
You got-
of the little guy. And there's
Okay,
a reason.
okay, how many
and
times are we
and,
gonna go back
and
and
they
forth and say
paid.
the same
And by the
thing?
way, they paid
Nuke
the.
is on your
they
side.
paid.
Nuke is on
got
your
it.
side.
They paid.
got it.
They
Nigga,
paid
We
the
got it.
lowest
We
taxes.
gotta
Work.
move on.
You got
You
it.
made the
You got
point.
it.
You made the point.
They paid the lowest
Black
taxes
Thought,
last
go
year.
nigga. So you have a
You
good
made the
fan
point.
base
You
out
made
there.
the
Well,
point.
thank you.
All right.
Yes.
Bob Pickett, this is to you, my brother, and the whole panel here, because you're beating the dead
Welcome
horse
back.
here.
Yep. Good. Thank you.
This past Thursday, a lot of us woke up to the shocking news that civil rights champion and the chairman of the House Oversight and Reform Committee, Congressman Elijah Cummings of Maryland, passed at the age of 68 years old. Those that knew Congressman Cummings, like myself, matter of fact, we shared some time together when we were down in Philadelphia at the DNC convention, nither. Matter of fact, I had conducted an interview with Congressman Cummings, and of course, he's been on Reverend Sharpton's show numerous times. I booked him over there, and I believe he made one appearance on the OpenLine show some years back. some of the remarks out there that folks said about Congressman Cummings. Congressman and Civil Rights Leader John Lewis, he says that we have lost a great leader at a time of crisis in our democracy. Former President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle Obama went on to say, we are heartbroken over the passing of our friend Elijah Cummings. He went on to say that he says that a chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Cummings, showed us all not only the importance of checks and balances within our democracy, but also the necessity of good people stewarding it. More by former President Obama is a tribute to his native Baltimore that one of its own brought such character, tact, and resolve into the halls of power every day. And he hopes Cummings' example will inspire more Americans to pick up the baton and carry it forward in a manner worthy of his service. I was waiting that morning to hear what former President Obama had to say. I didn't care what President Trump had to say. He didn't have to say anything. It didn't make me no difference because he was disrespectful to this man at the end of the day. And anybody that disagrees with you, you're disrespectful. But I want to throw it out to the panel for us to share some words about Congressman Cummings, and then I'll give out the information about his wake and funeral and him lying in state this coming week. Bob Pickett, I'll start with you.
Yep, I appreciate it very, very much, for team. I've had the pleasure and the knowledge to meet, work with, and have fun with the congressman. He was a gentleman and a person who, once he seizes on an issue, he doesn't give up. He will pursue that issue relentlessly until he achieves some sort of victory. I met him early on before he got into politics, and he was just an absolute delightful person who was focused on helping his people move forward. No question about it. And he's always had my admiration because he would take no stuff from people of other races denigrating African Americans, period.
Larry?
Well, first of all, we send our condolences out to Congressman Cummings' wife, his family, and to all of those that he loved. We send our condolences and our sympathies and our regrets on this untimely passing. As Nitha said to me earlier this morning, 68 is young. Mm-hmm. That's young to be, these days, to be leaving here. And it is untimely and unfortunate considering the key role that Congressman Cummings plays or was playing in the impeachment process.
That's correct.
As chair, I believe, was it Oversight?
Yes.
As chair of the House Oversight Committee. And Reform Committee. That was one of there are 6 committees that are connected to the impeachment, and there are 3 that are primary in those 6, and he was one of the 3. And, you know, it's unfortunate because I would have liked to have seen Cummings be able to move that impeachment process forward, particularly in response to the vicious and undeserved and malicious attacks that Trump made against Cummings. You know, I met Congressman Cummings on several occasions, and I was impressed by him. But more so, I am impressed by his career. He is the son of a sharecropper. He came from the most humble of beginnings, and he rose to the heights of society. Now, although I have issue, you know, with people in power, particularly in the corporate and government sectors, at the same time, I can't help but admire a true Horatio Alger story when I see it. This is a son of a sharecropper who was told he would never be a lawyer.
Right.
He was told that. They said, you'll never, like Malcolm X was told, you'll never amount to anything. You know, they said, you'll never be a lawyer. You can barely speak. Not only did he become the lawyer, but he became a trailblazer in terms of being the first African American to hold various positions in the Maryland state legislature, and then on to Congress. You know, and so, you know, my main regret is that he won't be able, at least physically, to kick it back to Trump. But maybe on the spiritual plane, on the astral plane, he will help
Watching
those.
from above.
Yes, that he will give strength to those who will push the impeachment process forward.
Yeah, and to that point, so there was reporting that even while he was on his deathbed, he was signing things. You know,
Yes.
they were bringing him important legislation, important things to sign, which is just a testament to
Related
who
to
he
the
was.
impeachment.
Yeah,
Yes.
and related to other things too,
Yes.
immigration and a bunch of
Yes.
other stuff. So just a testament to who he was and what his legacy will be. And, you know, despite the Trump's disgusting, vile attacks, like he still put out like an olive branch saying, come to Baltimore, come visit, come see what's going on. And even, you know, like always reaching across the aisle. So even when like Cohen was testifying, like he had really kind words to say about him. So just in that regard too, just a decent human being, but also a fighter and a champion, as we all know. And if you listen to so many journalists of color too that have covered him, they said how he helped them navigate stuff. He would always lend a helping hand. So somebody like that too, always looking out for people and the next generation too. I just wish I had met him. I never got an opportunity to meet him, and I wish I did, but definitely an amazing life.
Matter of fact, Bobby.
You would have been impressed.
Yeah, I'm impressed from afar. So.
And it's interesting because you had just left the table
When
we
he
were
came
sitting
by,
down, and
I
he came-
know.
Yes, you had just
I
left.
know.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes, Bobby.
I don't have much to add to what my colleagues have shared about it, right? It's a tremendous loss because this is a man who strove for balance, even though he saw so much inequity in life personally. And, you know, you have those in the black community who don't have an appreciation for that because they felt as though he didn't do enough in the city of Baltimore when you look at the crime and the poverty in there. And, you know, and I can't criticize because I don't live there on a day-to-day basis to understand it. But I do see somebody who was deeply devoted to changing stuff out there. And while you can question his methods, I don't think you should question who the man was. You know, and, you know, he took some criticism in the when Tlaib went after Mark Meadows and called him, basically insinuated that he made racist statements over this summer in one of the hearings. And he jumped in and he said, you know, I've known this man, you know, I consider him my best friend and people be surprised by it. He's not a racist, and gave him the opportunity to clarify what he meant and for her to clarify what she said to diffuse it. And to me, that was an example of somebody who is trying to be a statesperson and actually trying to get people to have civil dialogue, right? And that to me speaks to who he was as a person. So again, you can criticize his approach, but I would just say respect the man for who he was.
Exactly. I just want to just say this information real quick. Maryland Representative, U.S. Representative Elijah Cummings will lie in state in the U.S. Capitol this coming Thursday. There will be a public viewing in the
Oh, move your mic up.
there will be a public viewing in the two-story chamber following a formal ceremony for members of Congress, the Cummings family, and invited guests Thursday morning. The wake and funeral for Congressman Cummings will be held at the New Palmas Baptist Church in Baltimore this coming Friday, October 25th. The wake will begin at 8 a.m., followed by the funeral at 10 a.m. So that is the information, and I just want to take a quick moment of silence and just ring the bell 3 times for our brother, Congressman Elijah Cummings. And that's for, this to somebody that just was a tremendous force to deal with. Just to piggyback off of that, and a couple more stories, and in the short time that we have left.
I thought we were done.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking at my watch, and I know Bobby has to cover some football. But I want to talk about Mick Mulvaney, the acting White House Chief of Staff, through the Trump administration defense against impeachment into disarray this past Thursday. Mulvaney went on to say that the White House withheld nearly $400 million in military aid to Ukraine to further President Trump's political interests. Isn't that?
Yeah, it's and the thing is, what his political interest was to pursue this conspiracy theory around who hacked the DNC server, while his own agencies, intelligence agencies, have said time and time again, there's evidence it was Russia. Trump continues to want to take the focus off of Russia. He gets into this quid pro quo with the Ukrainian president to pursue some evidence, to find some evidence to say it was someone in the Ukraine, in the corrupt Ukraine, who did it, and not Russia. So you had this moment later regarding the serious issue where Pelosi and the Dems are in front of Trump, and she allegedly said, all paths lead to Putin with you, right? And there's just more and more evidence that points to this hold that he has, that Russia has on him. And so Mulvaney comes out and says, yes, it is quid pro quo, and get over it. And then afterwards
And then
comes back and
backtracks.
says, I didn't say that. That's not what I meant. And it's just mind blowing.
Trump told him to walk it back.
Right.
Checkmate to me. I mean, that's checkmate. I mean, now you have some Republicans coming out now and saying that, again, I don't know how much this is going to move the needle, but dealing with the Senate. But now you have Mitch McConnell talking about that looks like they will have, looks like the House will impeach Trump, and that there will be a trial in the Senate.
Yeah. Not only that, though, the comments that we just talked about.
Oh, your mic, Judge.
Oh, okay. Not only that, though, but the comments that we just talked about really are troublesome and just agitates the racism that was shown. And I think that the both parties to the commentary had every right to reject it and move on. I mean, legally had every right to reject it.
But don't be fooled by Mitch Loci McConnell, because he is a trickster.
Yes, Loki.
They can disagree on policy and still not
Impeach.
vote
Right.
to find him guilty. There is going to be impeachment. Impeachment is when the House of Representatives passes charges
Right.
against the president. That's impeachment. So there will be an impeachment.
Not the Senate, though.
The Senate is the one that sits as a jury and decides whether there's guilt or innocence and if the president should be removed. McConnell, Lindsey Graham, and other Republicans have spoken out against Trump pulling the troops out of Syria. Because they disagree with Trump on that one policy does
And
not
that's the
mean-
only thing.
Right. It
Right.
does not mean that they're going to vote in favor of the articles of impeachment that the House sends to the Senate.
And it's funny, part of the report this week is that McConnell had a luncheon meeting with other Republicans, PowerPoint presentations where he actually has chapter and verse of the Constitution, constitutional law, which to me was intended to educate them and ground them in the facts, because they have been going out irregardless of knowing the facts. Kevin McCarthy continues to make statements that just boggle the mind. He had a statement last month on 60 Minutes where he believes, oh, you just added a word in there. No, I didn't. That's actually what's in the transcript that you released. Well, I didn't see that. Well, because he didn't bother to read it, or he's just that ignorant. But he made another statement this week saying that this is such an it's unfair what the Democrats are doing, and that this president deserves the same rights and the same procedural rights as Nixon did and Clinton. Well, here's what happened. In those, they went to grand juries. There's no grand jury here. And everyone would argue if you go to a grand jury, that's even worse. So at least, because when it's a grand jury, you don't have Republicans sitting on these oversight committees who can actually hear what's going on. So they already have an ear inside these closed-door testimonies from, these State Department, professionals in there, and they can come out and report what they're doing, and it's kind of hard to govern that. But if it's a grand jury, it's not one of your own in there. So he's arguing for procedural rights that would actually make it worse for them. But again, he doesn't demonstrate that he actually knows what's going on, because he's in such spin mode to protect the president.
And I agree with Larry about the McConnell being a trickster, because even where was his op-ed this week in the Washington Post, I think? He didn't even mention Trump by name in that op-ed, which is the height of, whatever you want to call it, being a punk, being a trickster, all combined in one. And remember in 2000, I believe it was at the end of, the beginning of 2018, he said that 2017 was the most consequential year from a center-right perspective ever in all his years of governing. So, and that says a hell of a lot, because he's been in office forever. So I do not see him, at all voting to impeach him. Definitely not.
Chestnut, thank you. I apologize. I should have said irregardless.
There you go.
I'm sorry.
I almost said something, but I stopped myself. I actually caught that.
Thank you for the correction. Regardless.
I was like, he said irregardless.
I want to thank our tech. I want to thank our tech producer Tazo. I want you to put that quid pro quo back up there, my brother. Please put that back up there just for a quick minute. I'm glad that you had that up there, because at times you never know who's watching and who's listening. So at the end of the day, we talking about a quid pro quo, and we all may know what it means, but I just want to put this out there that is Latin for thing, meaning giving someone something he or she wants, but only if that person gives you what you want. Basically, the thing about a quid pro quo is that it makes the conduct look like a shakedown. And I just want folks to understand that, since that this is being thrown around a lot. There's something I want to get to Bobby on. I want to get to some sports stuff, but I want to mention this. And the first thing is, I say to all folks, I don't want to put a color on this, because all nationalities have this issue, but I do understand, because I'm black and understand the black experience. Let me tell you, folks, we all are going to leave here. We don't like to talk about it. Some of us don't like to plan on it. And my younger cousin talked about it. He said that everything is taken care of with him and his wife and his family. Everything. He says because there's too much nonsense goes on at times when folks pass. Now, last week we talked about at Tiana Jefferson in Fort Worth, Texas, that was shot by police in her house watching her nephew, where there was a neighbor that called for a wellness check. That means that was not a 911 emergency call. It was a non-emergency call. Police comes, basically has the gun out, and basically says, shoot.
Let me see your hands. Let me see your hands.
And then pow, and shoots her. And
in front of the nephew.
In front, of course, 8-year-old nephew. The funeral service was supposed to be yesterday. Bishop T.D. Jakes was supposed to deliver the eulogy, and Reverend Sharpton was going to deliver remarks. I woke up yesterday morning dumbfounded when I heard that the funeral was postponed. I said, what happened here? So it seems like there's a fight, there's a legal fight now between family members. Marquise Jefferson, who is listed as Atiana's father in her death certificate, was granted a temporary restraining order Friday to gain control of her funeral arrangements. Seems like other family members were making the funeral arrangements. The
Yeah, I
father
think the
was
aunt
left
was
out.
making the funeral arrangement. Then,
Arrangements
yeah.
and back and forth went, and it's just so sad because now your personal business is out on such a tragic thing. So when you're fighting for support for such a tragedy, and I'm not to say this may take away from the fight for justice, I'm not saying that, but just leaves a cloud over this. Now, I was speaking with Reverend Sharpton briefly yesterday, and he said that Monday, they're going to go before a judge at a probate court. Is that correct, Bob Pickett? Right. And
Your mic, your mic,
We're talking
your
what
mic,
state?
your mic,
Judge, your mic.
your mic.
We're talking what
Texas.
state? Texas. Okay. Yeah, that's the
Mike?
middle court. Yeah, that's the middle court.
Okay, so we have to wait and see what's going to happen there with the decision and how they're going to move about with the funeral going forward.
I just,
But keep in mind,
Your mic.
Mike, if you're going to
okay, keep in mind that they're gonna, whoever loses, they're gonna appeal to the Supreme Court.
so
Not the U.S., the state court.
the state court,
the state court, and it's so sad. It's just so sad.
It's
It is.
I implore everyone out there. I know it's an uncomfortable topic to talk about, but you have to do estate planning. You have to do how do you want to take care of your loved ones when that day comes. If you have the means, find an attorney. They can walk you through it. It's they do it in an empathetic way, but to get the facts out, if you want to do it online, there's websites that you can do it. Legal Zoom, you can do, but just please have that conversation, because if you have estranged family members and you have something of perceived value, there's a chance some of them will come out and want to insert themselves in it. So her father, which I guess it seems like he's estranged from her mother, has come out and said that he can pay for things. So he wants to make it known that he's not looking for handouts. He was upset that there were crowdfunding pages set up for it. You had NBA player Harrison Barnes of formerly of Dallas, but he plays with Sacramento, and his wife, and Malik Jackson of the Philadelphia Eagles. They have come forth and said that they will cover the funeral arrangements, and they've put together they're covering at least 90% of this, and now this come up. So it's an unfortunate situation which happened to her. It's actually terrible what happened to her, and then it gets even messier that the family can't have peace in just burying her to deal with the upcoming trials, that they have to relive this over and over again because this former police officer now who was arrested is going to come up with all kind of defenses to say how he was justified in doing what he's doing.
Exactly. So that's why I say that. I'm just trying to move this real fast.
Yeah, let me just say quickly, and I've seen this happen before, because People's Organization for Progress, we deal with families that have police brutality cases. And when situations like this arise, our hearts go out to the victims and their families. And our hearts dictate to us to do acts of compassion and generosity. The only thing is that this world is not just turned by compassion and generosity. It's also turned by the legal system. And whenever you venture forth into a situation like that, you have to consider the legal ramifications. When someone dies, legally, the immediate actors are the immediate family members. Aunts, friends, siblings may not necessarily
Correct.
be the immediate family member. So a man dies, his wife is the primary estate
Right.
representative. If the wife and the father have passed, the children become the primary estate holders. And if you start doing stuff, the stuff you may start doing may be undone by them. So when you enter into a situation, you have to say, well, who are the immediately family members? Because we had a situation in our own organization where we were trying to get someone buried, and everything we did was for naught when one of the immediate
Right.
family members showed up.
Yep.
You know, and so
I just want to, and I'm glad you said that. And I went through, I didn't go through it like that, but when my mother passed, my aunt I signed over as a legal guardian because she was doing certain things for me. And we sat down and we went over everything. And when it came down, when my mother passed, we worked together. We worked together to pick out things, how much we were paying, how much money was going to go here and there. Couple times, one of my aunts said, I want that. No, you're not getting that, but it didn't cause no rift.
Right.
But I just wanted to make that point. But I know Bobby has to get ready to go. A couple of sports things. And Bobby, I'm not sure if we talked about this. I definitely want to cover the baseball with the Washington Nationals, now the Houston Astros going to the World Series and the Yankees losing. I want to talk about that. But did we cover, I don't recall covering in the past 2 weeks the situation where in California, I believe, that now college athletes...
Gavin Newsom, right.
Right. Can you
So
talk
there was
little bit about
a law passed in California which for universities in California that amateur athletes, their student athletes, have a chance to make money from the likeness of their image.
Correct.
And I believe that goes into effect 2022, I believe, when it goes in. And so it's, I actually applaud it, right? Which is, I just think that the stranglehold that universities and the NCAA have had on protecting images while they make a lot of money, and their argument around, well, we provide them an education, but there's more to what is needed in education. And I remember there's a couple of NBA players that I've talked about, or former players, who talk about their college experience, and they were playing at Division I top schools, and while their books were their classes were covered, their books weren't always covered. While they had a meal plan, it was always when they were able to eat with the team, like after practice, but when they had time off, they didn't have the money or the disposable income to do it. So, and they generate millions for it. And I remember Chris Webber telling the story when he was at University of Michigan, the Fab Five, where he's trying to just, hang out like a 19, 20-year-old would do. And he walks past stores and he sees his name on the back of a jersey and people selling it, and none of that money's coming back to him.
Yeah.
So there's been an inequity for such a long time.
Yeah.
Now, the opponents, again, will say they're being provided a chance for an education for free, and free is a little strange. So there will be opposition to it. But I'm all
But you
in favor
support
of
it.
so.
Yes, we actually agree, Bobby.
Now, let's talk real quickly. Last week,
Because it's allowing them to do their likeness, and the way it translates is if there's a car dealership in that area that wants to do something with the University of Connecticut women's basketball team, then they'll do a marketing piece to say, hey, come to our car because the Lady Huskies do it. And then every picture, every image of the team, they would contribute in making it because it's making money for. So to me, it just it
And they make
makes
a
sense.
lot of money.
and hopefully it creates a domino effect that this opens up, across America here, and that these folks, these young folks, because if you received a hamburger, they could have thrown you out off of your scholarship and things like that. So
there's parents who can't even go visit and watch their child participate because they don't have the money to fly. but yet,
And a sponsor
if
wants
it
to
wasn't
pay
for
for
them,
it.
if it wasn't for them, that child wouldn't be born to actually participate, to actually generate money from. So there's just some inequities that need to be cleaned
It's a good
up.
thing. But I'm going to jump on this real quick. The National League Championship Series this last week between the St. Louis Cardinals and Washington Nationals. The Washington Nationals swept the St. Louis Cardinals 4-0, and the Washington Nationals are headed to the World Series for the first time.
Yes.
And then, of course, we had the last night American League Championship Series where the New York Yankees lost to the Houston Astros 4-2. It was a glimmer of hope. I yelled. I was out last night. I watched majority of the game, but I yelled when I saw that the Yankees tied up in the top of the ninth. Then to have my heart sink to see that in the bottom of the ninth, the Houston Astros won the game. We talked about this, Bobby, and on paper, the Houston Astros had better pitching. And something bothered me about this New York Yankee team, and if they would have won, I still would have felt that there was just still something missing there. And the other night when the Yankees won, I looked at the situation where Reggie Jackson, where he hit the 3 home runs. That was 1978. And I look back at some of those guys that played on that team, from Mickey Rivers, Thurman Munson, Chris Chambliss, and then I go to the '86 Mets and Darryl Strawberry and Good and Keith Hernandez and Carter, and these guys were big game players. And I'm not going to throw any Yankees under the bus, but I didn't see the fire. I didn't see the fight there. And I saw that Stanton put himself in the lineup the other day, and when he struck out the first time up, I think the bases or first and second bases loaded, I just noticed that he wasn't ready. He was hurt, but I know Reggie Jackson pretty much said, stand up. This is when you got to play. But I throw it over to you.
Yeah,
Bobby.
it's just listen. They had another tremendous season, winning over 100 games, which is very hard to do, and they did it with so many injuries. They had guys come up from their minor leagues that no one knew about. Gio Urshela, for one. That just outperformed anything they had done before. So I just believe they've had this tremendous season. The Astros were fundamentally built to be a better team than the Yankees, as much as Yankee fans hate to hear that. And it's more than just the pitching. They had those 3 big dominant pitchers, but they also play a style of hitting where they struck out the least amount of any team. So as baseball has changed in terms of the big home run, right, and people's changing launch angles and trying to hit the ball deep, they were just structurally better suited to win this game. The Yankees didn't come up with big hits. I would never question the heart of professional athletes. They put their heart and soul into playing this sport. And they just did not get that timely hit. It's not that they didn't have fire, in my opinion. The old adage of good pitching stops good hitting played out in this one. Aroldis Chapman throws close to 100-mile-per-hour pitch last night in the 9th inning with 2 outs, 1 man on, and little 5'7" Jose Altuve hits a 2-run homer. 100-mile-per-hour pass, and he knocked it out of the park. He's 5'7". So he knocks it out of the ballpark. They are just fundamentally strong. And I equate it a little bit to the Knicks of the early 90s, where they had a good team and can never get past Jordan and the Bulls. The Yankees have a good team, and for 2 out of the last 3 years, they can't get past the Houston Astros. That being said, I don't think many people are going to be watching the World Series other than those who are Houston fans and National fans, because that matchup does not incite any kind of energy to say, oh, the Astros versus the Nationals. Neither team is well known on the national stage, even though the Astros won the World Series 2 years ago. And then just lastly, this is the first decade since the 1910s where the Yankees have not been in the World Series. So from 2010 until now, the Yankees have lost 4 divisional games and have not made it to the World Series.
Is anybody going to lose their job?
No, again, they won 103 games this year. And, the reason why, so they won 100 games a couple of years ago when they lost to the Astros, and the manager, Joe Girardi, did lose his job. But that had more to do with his style. They like Aaron Boone. And what he did this year, again, with so many injuries, Stanton missed most of the year, Judge missed most of the year, Severino. So the stars that they had didn't give him much this year, and they still won 103 games.
Exactly. So somebody mentioned that, also glad that Fatin didn't have his Houston Astros shirt on. First of all, it's not a Houston Astro. I try to explain that to you, that I played in a softball league in Cambria Heights Men's Softball League, and the rule is that all teams had to be named after Negro teams, and that's why you would see it. It looks like with the H and the stars but no, it's a Negro team.
So Edward Latson, let me just clarify my statement. I said from a consecutive decade, so you go from 2010 to 2019. Your point about 82 to 95. They were in the World Series in the early 80s, and they were in the World Series in the 90s. So it would be from 1980 to 1989, they were in the World Series. From 1990 to 1999, they were in the World Series. So, yes, there were longer stretches, but I'm talking each decade, not
That's right.
10 consecutive years.
And somebody tried to correct me on the radio portion, and we're going to deal with that next week, because I found the exact stat, because it was the point of appearance in the decade thing, so that's something. There was one more thing I wanted to mention, but I don't recall what it is.
We'll do
but
it
I
next
know
week.
exactly, because I know Bobby has to get ready and go. Anything else real quick?
So, again, it's great to have Nither back. We do have spirited conversations.
It's good to be back.
This was
Thank
mild
you.
compared to some of our texts
This
and
is
our
actually
personal
true.
phone calls.
This
I'm
is
glad
true.
we were able to. Yeah, I'm glad
This
we were
is the
able
mild,
to
the radio version.
share some of what we debate about
Of our
out there. So,
banter.
yes.
It's good to be back. Thank you. And hopefully, yes, this week I'll be writing a piece, just to preempt that, about the new Sarah trial and my family and everything. So hopefully that'll be out this week.
Right, and this Tuesday is the National Day Against Police Brutality. There will be demonstrations taking place in cities all across the country on October 22nd. Our organization, People's Organization for Progress, we're doing ours on the 21st, because on Mondays we have something every Monday called Justice Monday, where we protest in front of the federal building. So our National Day of Police Brutality demonstration is going to take place on Monday, October 21st, 5 o'clock p.m. We're going to meet at the Lincoln statue in Newark at the intersection of West Market and Springfield Avenue. We're going to march to the federal building. And if you are upset about the murder of Botham Jean in his house by the police, and you are upset by the murder of Tatiana Jefferson in her house by the police, you should be participating in somebody's demonstration connected to the National Day Against Police Brutality.
I just want to say this. I remember what it was. Somebody brought up just now about New York Governor Cuomo saying you be disrespectful using the N-word. I listened to that whole interview. I'm going to talk to my program director, because I don't, one of the things me and Mtume talked about is that the effect, just like if you read certain books that had the N-word in it, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I think when you're using a word for reference, and saying the N-word is just not effective for me. That's why I don't really want to have this conversation about what Cuomo did. But New York Governor Cuomo was making a point about something, and it was dealing with the definition N-word WAP. and he was saying, if you look that word up, what it means. He didn't come out and just use the N word. He didn't do that. And I would like to have a conversation about that, but I want to talk to my, because I agree with him too, mate, that at this stage of 2019, we know what the N word means. But if we're going to have a discussion, I have to use the word in the context of the discussion.
Well, you think he should have used it too? That's what you're saying?
I listened to that, and some people felt that it was disrespectful at the end of the day, that he was using it maybe in a derogatory term, but he was using it as a definition of something. And if you look that up, that word is out there, and it means something, and that's what he was trying to say. He was just trying to prove that point. Okay. And I feel that if we're going to have a discussion, just like they talked about one of the books, should they take the N word out? And I agree. No, don't take the word out, because it was written back in that time, and it had a meaning. And if we take that, then you lose the context of it. So, that's another conversation for another day, and I know that's a hot conversation. So before I go out there on the limb, I'll talk with my program director, and if I have to respect what the station says. So if the station says, then I'm not going to,
Yeah.
But I don't think Cuomo was being disrespectful, because he was just basically talking about a definition of dealing with that definition of N-word WAP.
When will you know?
When I ask him this week.
Well, tune in next week.
Tune in next week.
And you'll find out.
There you go. Let's get our Bobby out of here. All right, that's it for today's show.
Right, thank you
Bobby
very much.
Childs, take us out.
Listen, I like everybody. Again, thank you all for tuning in. Get your mind right and keep a good thought.
Have a good Sunday. God bless.